My name is Leslie Kelen. I'm the director for the Center for Documentary Expression in Art. And our organization is based in Salt Lake City. We're a nonprofit entity. We've been doing documentary work for 33 years now. And you're seeing really the first national exhibit that we have that's traveling throughout the United States. Just very briefly, I wanted to thank the Allentown Museum staff and board and members, and now you for coming out here this afternoon and being with us here. So we've been treated very well, wined and dined more or less, and we appreciate that. Not too much whining, but some dining. Anyway, the exhibit that we have here was created over a 5-year period, which involves the research, the photography selection, the printing of the photographs, the creation of an audio guide, a publication, and so forth and so on. And we opened the exhibit initially in a human rights gallery in Salt Lake City. So it was built to open a human rights gallery. And we focused on the civil rights movement. We had initially a different version of the show in mind, but later on we were essentially helped to come across the idea of activist photographers. And over a period of a number of years, I roamed around the country and met the people that are sitting next to me. 2 photographers are not here with us anymore, George Elfie Ballas, who passed away in 2010, and David Prince, who passed away just this past year. It's really been, it's been a deeply satisfying and transformative experience to enter the movement through the lives of activist photographers. That's what I was given the opportunity to do. And so I had the opportunity to briefly travel with them into their lives, through their lives, and see the movement and to some degree the world through that. So today, essentially, it's my pleasure to share some of that with you because these photographers are going to take you to some degree somewhat into their lives, into the movement, and then through their photographs. At the end, we'll have a short Q&A, and then we can just, after that, we can just hang out together a little bit, okay? So anyway, I'm going to do a brief intro here of the photographers. These are very brief bios, and they're focused entirely on their movement work. So we're going to go start from left and proceed to the right. And Tamio Wakayama, far left, was born a few months before the December 7th, 1941 outbreak of the Pacific War. He and his family were part of the community of some 22,000 Japanese Canadians living along the coast of British Columbia, who, like American Japanese, were declared enemy aliens and placed in remote internment camps for the war years. After the war, Canadian internees were faced with the choice of being deported to Japan or settling east of the Rockies. Wakayama's family went east and settled in Chatham, a farming town in southern Ontario. For Tamio, the central challenge of his life became coming to terms with the internment and the debilitating effects of post-war racism. The healing process began in the fall of 1963 when, instead of returning to finish his university education, he drove south and became part of the American Civil Rights Movement. After briefly working as a volunteer janitor and driver for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, Tamio became a staff member of the Atlanta office. His graphic skills prompted SNCC photographer Daniel Lyon to suggest he try photography, which he did. In the summer of '64, he managed SNCC's darkroom, which you'll be hearing about more. At the end of the summer, he took over as SNCC field photographer in Mississippi. Bob Fletcher, next to Tamio, became interested in photography while attending Nashville's Fisk University as an undergraduate. In 1963, Bob spent the summer in Harlem as an organizer for the Harlem Education Project, HEP, an affiliate of the Northern Student Movement, and began to photograph street life. He was arrested while photographing a Harlem picket line demonstration and spent a night in the Tombs, New York's infamous holding facility. Some of you have been there. Yeah. Not right. That night, he decided to spend the summer as a volunteer for the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project. If I'm going to get arrested, he said, I want it to be for a cause that makes a difference. In Mississippi, Bob photographed the activities of independent black farmers living in Lake County and accompanied the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in its challenge to the sitting white supremacist members of the old Democratic Party. Bob also covered the '65 Selma to Montgomery March, the Lawrence County Freedom Organization, later the 1966 Meredith March. From late 65 to the fall of 68, Bob worked with the Southern Visual Education Service, a SNCC media project that developed educational film strips that could be used as grassroots educational organizing tools. Bob and Maria Varela produced such things as If You Farm, You Can Vote, a film strip designed to organize local black cotton farmers and show them how to register and vote in the federally funded cotton allotment elections, a benefit reserved until then exclusively for white farmers. Matt Herron, the curator of this Light-Ours exhibit, studied photography in Rochester as a private student of minor white, and then worked as a writer and photographer for the American Friends Services Committee, a Quaker social justice organization in Philadelphia. Matt was organizing peace demonstrations as well as shooting assignments for Life and Look at the time of the 1960s sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, and Greensboro, North Carolina. He was arrested for attempting to integrate an amusement park in Maryland in the summer of '63. Shortly afterward, he and his wife Janine moved to Jackson, Mississippi, with their 2 small children. They were the only family to move south and join the civil rights movement. For the next 2 years, Matt pursued 3 styles of photography: photojournalism, documentary photography, and photography in the service of the civil rights organizations. In the summer of '64, Matt organized the Southern Documentary Project, of which you'll hear more, and which fielded a team of photographers to document the South in this moment of dramatic transformation. Herbert Eugene Randall, sitting next to me here, was born in the Bronx and is of Shinnecock Indian, African American, and West Indian ancestry. He studied photography under Harold Feinstein. From '58 to '68, worked as a freelance photographer, publishing with the Associated Press, United Press International, and Black Star. Herbert was also a founding member of the Kamoinge, is that pronounced right?
That's right.
Kamoinge Workshop, a forum formed by African-American photographers in New York City in '62 to address the underrepresentation of black photographers in the art world and encourage major media outlets to present African-American people and culture in a more authentic, complex, and compassionate manner. In '64, Sandy Lee, director of the Freedom Summit's Hattiesburg Project, invited Herbert to document the project and its impact. Herbert spent the summer photographing the Freedom School's voter registration and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party campaign. His photos were developed in SNCC's Atlanta darkroom by Tamio Wakayama, and 5 images were published that summer. I don't know if you guys have been through the exhibit, but the bloodied image of Rabbi Arthur Leleveld, have you seen that? A short-term summer volunteer and head of Cleveland's Fairmount Temple received widespread distribution. Maria Varela began her community organizing career over 50 years ago when she joined SNCC in '63. Initially assigned to Selma, Alabama, Maria's job was to develop voter literacy program. Dissatisfied with white middle-class portrayals in literacy material, Maria began creating training materials that reflected black people's lifestyles. After Lowndes County's Sheriff Jim Clark and their program shut down their program by arresting Maria's project staff, she moved to Mississippi, spent the next 5 years responding to SNCC organizers' requests for training materials. Maria determined these materials needed to show black people taking leadership positions and enlisted SNCC photographer, Bob Fletcher, to take pictures for her projects. Bob challenged Maria to begin making her own photos and recommended she study with Matt Herron,
incestuous bunch here,
who was then living in New Orleans. In addition to creating educational materials, Maria's job included photographing marches in Mississippi and Alabama, as SNCC believed the presence of cameras would often protect marchers from violence. Covering the March Against Fear, also known as the Meredith March, the final theme in our exhibit, where the slogan Black Power was born, Maria photographed the first Black Panther t-shirt hand-drawn with a magic marker by a Canton, Mississippi teenager. She wrote, "The media implied that black power was imposed on the Southern movement by urban black militants. I saw it differently. Mirrored in the eyes of that youth was a strength and pride that had been freed from within. So we'll begin the panel discussion, and thank you. And so we'll start with the question of how each of you joined the movement, how and sort of why each of you joined the movement. Let's begin with Tamio.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. What a great introduction. I don't have to say anything more. But to get into that a little bit more, when we were forced to begin our exile in the East, we have to remember that we were still classified as enemy aliens. And to compound matters, the mass media, the warriors, was still continuing to present its propaganda, which depicted us as Japs, this alien species, physically repulsive, treacherous, cruel, the very embodiment of evil. So I grew up hating that I was Japanese, and I wanted to throw away every last vestige of this hateful identity. And I longed very desperately to be like John Wayne, tall, heroic, handsome, and above all else white. Now, this inner turmoil continued until the year 1963, which was a turning point in my life. I finished my third year of university, and during that semester, I fell, for the first time in my life, hopelessly in love. And unfortunately, this affair came to a sad ending. I mean, to me, she was this beautiful white Russian goddess. And when the rejection came, I was not only crushed, but horribly, terribly conflicted, because I didn't know whether the affair had ended because of my ineptitude and insecurities, or whether indeed our love had failed because of hidden issues of race. The only thing I was left with was the pain and humiliation of rejection. But I also sensed somewhere deep inside me that I was ultimately responsible. And if I couldn't conquer my inner demons and get my shit together, that my whole life would be a series of tragic failures. Now, during this very dark period in my life, the only thing that could reach my deadened imagination was this amazing spectacle of the civil rights movement that had erupted all throughout the South. And I can remember one day coming home from my summer work and turning on the TV to watch this drama unfolding in Danville, Virginia, where a group of about 10 black students, impeccably dressed with a preternatural calm, entering and taking their seats at the forbidden lunch counter, while all around them, swirled this maelstrom of racial violence. And they remained calm, even with raw eggs and Cokes and coffee were poured over their heads. Well, I was totally mesmerized. I mean, these students that day were to me an eminent presence, and I understood in a very deep but still unidentified part of me the essence of their struggle. So I continued to follow the movement throughout that summer, which culminated in the historic March on Washington. And somewhere in there grew in my mind the inchoate idea that perhaps within this black struggle for freedom, I could locate the matrix of my own liberation. So at the end of the summer, I told my poor mother, well, Mom, I want to take a short vacation to the States before coming back and completing my final year of university. So I threw a backpack and a sleeping bag into the back of my VW Beetle. I knew no one. I didn't have a single name of a person or an organization. I just simply drove south and walked into one of the most luminous and transformative moments in the life of America, and indeed of the world. Thank you.
Bob?
I feel the same way. I feel that you've already covered me.
Yeah. Well, let me uncover you.
I have to think of things to fill in with. I guess I started out in college. Actually, I started out, my father could draw and I couldn't. And I thought, well, at one point, I could use a camera. In college, I saw that there was an article series of photography as an art in the Saturday Review, which my family got me a subscription to, and I began looking at photographs and began learning about various photographers around the planet, particularly the Farm Security Administration. And I thought, I would like to do that. That's the kind of stuff I would like to do. So, and they also took me to the Detroit Art Institute, where I had courses there. They just set up for me that showed me about composition and in different periods how the visual tricks that they use in their paintings. And so I finally decided that I would like to do that. Didn't know how. At the same time, the civil rights struggle was in full force. There was this waiting between organizers and the news media. The 6 o'clock news had just kind of been instituted. And so there was this whole thing that would happen every night. The news reporters would come and do their story. And what that did was to make the whole civil rights movement aware, more important in the eyes of the public, the national public. So I joined the Harlem Education Project. That was my first introduction to the movement. And what I did there was, since I was interested in photography, I worked with some kids to set up a darkroom. I had a friend in Detroit who, before I came to New York to work with Harlem Education Photography, HEP, showed me how to develop film. So I went there and worked with some kids and had a friend who went in, we worked together. He was outside, I was in the kitchen, it was dark. I'd take the film and slide up and down in bowls, and he would count the time, and together we came out with negatives. It was the most amazing thing, so magical. And then the next summer, I went back to Detroit, and this friend showed me this enlarger. And I was amazed at what it could do, because up to then we'd been taking the film and putting it on a piece of paper, holding it up to the sun, and then developing the results. So I came back and worked with him and I was photographing in the neighborhood, like Les mentioned. And at one point, there was this group of junkies who they'd seen TV, they'd been kicked out of this bar, they weren't going to stand for it. They went out and made picket signs, put a picket line up in front of this bar on 8th Avenue and 137th Street. Crowd came, police came, Bob Fletcher came to take pictures of it. Bob Fletcher got arrested by the policeman. So that was when, as Les said, I thought, if I'm going to go to jail for a bullshit like this, I'm going to make it really mean something. And when I got out of jail, I was there for a couple of nights, overnight. When I got out of there, I applied to COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations, and they accepted me. I applied as a freedom school teacher, but I got down there with my camera and started photographing. And I met Matt, and there were some other photographers already down there. So I met a guy named Cliff Voss. Cliff Voss was a SNCC photographer. And I had this unique experience. Cliff was black. He had this Jewish girlfriend, Iris. Cliff and Iris would drive around Mississippi in Cliff's pickup truck. I ended up driving around with Cliff and Iris. It was the scariest thing imaginable. I couldn't imagine how that could happen, but I said, I'm going to do it. I started smoking cigarillos. I had quit smoking in New York. I started smoking those and inhaling them. But got a chance to see Mississippi that way and to photograph different parts of it. A lot of the photographers were focused on one area. I was kind of all over the place. And then because Matt had encouraged it, I picked out a place called Harmony, the Harmony Community in Lee County, Mississippi.
Did I do that?
You encouraged the idea of focusing on one area. And so that was my area. That was a place where kids were not only, well, the community was composed of farmers who had 100, 200 acres of land themselves. These were black farmers. They were fairly well-to-do. And students came down and they built a community center that summer. So my project was to photograph the development of that community center. And after that, at the end of that summer, I went and joined Time. Didn't I join you, I think, in the dark room? And I became the second darkroom slave.
Oh, really?
And see that? And so that was when I became a part of SNCC, actually, was in the dark room there. And the dark room was in the SNCC national office in Atlanta. And I met people there. And over time, I took over. We had a printing press, and I did the photographing for the Student Voice, which was a SNCC's publication. And I began to go on demonstrations and photograph them with SNCC directly, became a part of SNCC, became part of the SNCC Board of Central Committee.
Bob, I was wondering if you could save some of that for the second question.
Yeah,
In terms
it's
of,
starting to go over.
yeah, because we'll be going into that in the second
We'll
question.
talk about a movement work.
I thought I was
No, just hold
Segue.
on.
Oh,
Can I ask you to hold off some of that to the second question?
Definitely.
Because I'm going to ask you the same stuff again.
All right.
Yeah.
So the second question is how did I
How did they
incorporate?
basically they're
What did
fitting
you
in?
do?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Your turn.
Les, of course, has covered everything I was going to say. I was a bit older than many of the volunteers who came south. I was married. I had 2 children. I had been a conscientious objector during the Korean War and done 2 years of alternative service teaching at a Quaker school in Ramallah, in what is now the West Bank, where I met my wife. And 1962, well, 1 and 2, found us in Philadelphia. I just quit working for the Quakers, and I was organizing peace demonstrations. And we were pretty successful. I apologize to those of you who've heard this story before, but we could get 1,000 well-dressed Quakers with neatly lettered signs circling Philadelphia City Hall. The police knew we were nonviolent. They were very cooperative with us. And in the middle of the night, a little voice woke me and said, "What you're doing doesn't make a damn bit of difference. You're just making people feel good that they're protesting. If you want to be relevant, you've got to go south. If you want to really practice nonviolence, which my wife and I were deeply committed to, you've got to go south." So, to shorten the story, we did. We loaded our Volkswagen bus and headed south.
Freedom is very popular.
I'm going to conclude this with a little story about entering the South, because we had never been south before. And to us, it was a very frightening place, an unknown place. So we arrived in Birmingham, Alabama on a Sunday morning. Tired, dirty, been on the road a while. And the church bells were all ringing. What were the church bells ringing? They were playing Dixie. That was their religious hymn for Sunday morning. And I said to Janine, let's find a laundromat, because we had lots of dirty clothes. We found one. I stuffed a pillowcase and headed for the door, and there was a sign that said white only. Introduction to the South. I said, we ain't going to wash our clothes here. Let's find a church. Let's find a black church and go to church. The closest church to us happened to be the 16th Street Baptist Church. So we appeared at the door. We were warmly welcomed. We entered the service. Halfway through the service, Melissa, my 3-year-old daughter, had to go to the bathroom. So Janine took her downstairs, and she did her business. And 2 weeks later, 4 little girls were blown to smithereens in that restroom by a Klan bomb. So entering the South became very real to me. And I was back in 2 weeks on assignment for life, photographing the aftermath of that bombing. And I think I'll stop there. That's a good enough introduction. Oh, I have one other thing to say. Tamio Wakayama. The SNCC experience for many of us was a finding of ourselves, as Tamio has said. He came south as Tom Wakayama and left as Tamio.
I'm just wondering, is it possible to get some of these young people and others to come and sit down on the floor here if you'd like to sit? Is that possible to do that, David? Yeah? Come and sit down over here if you want. You don't have to stand all the time, okay? Anyway, let's go on.
There's a chair here.
Yeah.
There's a chair here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Herbert Randall. I became involved with the civil rights it was the early 50s or middle 50s at the latest, with the NAACP youth group, and on in various organizations. And specifically in 1964, I had a fellowship, photographic fellowship. Julie Prettyman, who was a member of SNCC at the time, and I think Julie was running the Manhattan office of SNCC. And she said, Herbert, since you have a fellowship for photography, there's a summer program happening, and perhaps you could go down there and fulfill some of your obligations to the fellowship and also help that summer program. And so this, I had never been south before, on purpose. On purpose. And when she said south, she just said south. She didn't say where south. And so she told me it was Mississippi, and I told her there's no way in hell I'm going to Mississippi. But anyhow, after a lot of thought, a lot of other things, I went to Mississippi, and enough.
How many of you are from Allentown? I want to congratulate you on the search for that young 5-year-old. You were an inspiration to the country. Well, I also was reluctant to warriordom. And I got a letter from a woman saying, would I please come to the SNCC office and work there and help her? And I'm like, no, they kill people down there. And they have bugs with wings and they fly into your hair. But here I am, touring colleges, working for the Young Christian Students, which was a Catholic social action organization, and talking to students about you need to support the Southern movement. You need to support the sit-ins, the freedom rides. This is where, we as Christians belong. And here I have this letter in my suitcase, and no, I'm not going, you know. So Catholic guilt, 2 words, explains. So I get down there, and I'm thinking, well, you know, how dangerous can Atlanta be, really? I'll just, you know, stay safe. And then I encountered Frank Smith, a SNCC worker, and Bernard Lafayette, who had just come from Selma. And the person in Selma who was the mainstay in the movement was Father Ouellette, who is a French-Canadian priest, pastor of a black Catholic church. And Father really supported the movement. And he wanted to support SNCC as much as he could. So Frank said to me, you know, we think you should go to Selma. And I'm like, quietly, because I do not want to embarrass myself in front of these SNCC veterans who had been in jail and taken their life into their hands. And here I am, a weenie about, they said, we really need, you know, we're Baptists, you know, you're Catholic, you can support this man and what he wants done. And just remember that SNCC's whole philosophy was, you do what the community wants you to do. The community leads us in the work that we do. We did not come in, and for the most part, imposing strategies. We did what people asked us to do. And so this was a part of, let's do what the community, which in this case is Father and many of his parishioners who want a voter literacy project. Let's do what they ask us to do, and you're the best person to do it. And I just heard this last week, that Bernard told a friend of mine, yeah, you know, we didn't know, we didn't know Maria, but we just thought we'd just send her over there and see what would happen. It's like, thanks, Bernard. So that's kind of where I'm going to stop. I ended up then just doing, at people's requests, what they needed done.
So we'll go to question 2, starting back with you, Tamio. So how you fitted into the movement. This is also an opportunity to talk about SNCC a little bit, and how you interacted. Okay.
On the second day of my journey to the south, I had arrived in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was feeling out of sorts, having slept in the back of my Volkswagen, which is not the most comfortable place to spend the night. And I spent the day in a desultory tour of the magnificent Capitol buildings, and I was bored stiff. So I was going back to my car thinking, well, this is kind of stupid, and it's about time I came to my senses and maybe went home. And so I got in my car, and the radio was on, and the broke in with a flash announcement that morning in Birmingham, Alabama, a bomb had exploded in the basement of the 16th Street Baptist Church, which Matt had alluded to earlier, and 4 young girls had been killed. So I checked my map and saw that Birmingham was a straight shot south. So I turned around and headed for Birmingham. And I can remember landing in Birmingham that evening of that horrible day. And I remembered like it happened yesterday. And I drove down this very pleasant boulevard, which reminded me of the stately University Ave in Toronto. And this illusion of familiarity was crashed in the next second when a Jeep came whirling around the corner with 4 or 5 soldiers in full battle dress and looking grimly from helmets. And the top of the car looked like a steel picket fence with the bayonets affixed to their long rifles. So I said, whoa, this is not Toronto. And I remember that it was like a pleasantly warm fall evening in the summer, and there should have been, crowds out. But the place was practically deserted. There was nobody on the streets. Mine was about the only car. And I'd been driving all day, and I was anxious to get some coffee and a dinner before retiring for the night at the Y. So I finally spotted one place open, so I stopped and walked in, and it turned out to be a news kiosk with a bunch of high benches where you'd get your shoes shined. And the owner was leaning down, and it was a very fat kind of white Southerner chewing on a big cigar. And he was talking to his two employees, two black teenagers. And he said, "Boys," I says, "what y'all gonna do now?" And they just kept looking down. And finally, one of them looks up and says, "Don't know, boss. So I think we're gonna have to go out and do some killing tonight." Whoa. So I continued my search for a restaurant and finally found one place that's open, and I pull in behind this pickup truck, emblazoned with Dixie flags and bumper stickers extolling the virtues of white America. So I walk in, and thankfully it turned out to be one of those ubiquitous barbecue places, and there were 4 big black men sitting in the room, and they looked terrifying to me. So I walk in, and I feel 4 eyes boring into my back. And I sit down, ordered the food, which turned out to be totally delicious. And after I lit up a cigarette for my after-dinner coffee and my pack of Du Mauriers, and sitting there, and I see the counter guy's curious. So I said, "Oh, they're Canadian cigarettes. They're different, so you try one." So I gave him, that broke the ice. So the owner came up and started talking to me, and for the next half hour, he told me what it was like to be black in the South. And it was this horrific, terrifying story of how a black man could wake up in the morning and never know whether he would just have to face the daily humiliations of being black in the South, or whether he would have to face the ultimate terror of a lynching, which happened quite frequently in the South. So he said, "Well, he said, we appreciate y'all coming down here, but I think you should get back in your little car, turn around, and go back home. And when you get there, you tell all your people that what they've been seeing, all the beatings, the jailings, and the lynchings, and the fire hoses and dogs, says that's all very real. And it'd be happening every day." He said, "But you be careful leaving, because that truck you parked behind belongs to the Klan, because they're keeping a close watch on us, because we're the only place open this night. So when you leave, they may just stop you, because they say, 'Well, who's that boy in there talking with them niggers?' And they may just pull you over, and God knows what could happen." So I get back in my car, and I check into the Y without any further incident. And the next morning, but the information I get is that the movement people are going to be at the A.G. Gaston Motel. So I wander over there the next day. I meet John Lewis, the chairman, talk to him. He turns out to be this beautiful guy who gives me a lot of time. We exchange information, and he says, "Well, this is my friend, Julian Bond, these are other SNCC workers, and maybe you want to visit SNCC headquarters after Birmingham." I said, "Thank you, John." And I turned out John and I shared an apartment later in Atlanta. So that's how I came to be with SNCC, and I followed through, and I went to Atlanta, and I drove the major leadership of SNCC in my little car, and it was the burly James Foreman, executive director, Julian Bond, my good friend, and communications director, and Danny Lyon, their brilliant young photographer. And this is the first time I had that many people in the car, And so there was this truck that was like going really slow. So I said, "Well, I'll pass him." So I went out there and I floored the accelerator, but not much happened, So the semi comes, huh?
Did you tell him you're in the VW?
Yeah, my Volkswagen, right? So there's a semi coming down, and I think, holy shit, you know, I'm fine. And I finally tuck in before, you know, and I said, oh, great. You know, what a way to start my career as a freedom fighter, wiping out the demonstration. So I get to Atlanta, and then Foreman asked me, you know, that I could stay in the Freedom House, but would I mind cleaning up, you know, and taking out the garbage? And I said, sure. And later I discovered that this was Foreman's way of testing one's bona fides and commitment to this. So after I drove Foreman back to his, and I remember, now Foreman was this very imposing figure. He had a whole barrage of heavy size and dirty looks, and he could be quite intimidating. So he looks over at me and says, hey man, he said, what are you? You one of them humanitarians? You know, which kind of pissed me off. Because, I mean, he didn't know me. I mean, what's he doing getting on my case? So I said, no, sir, I'm a Sokseki Buddhist. And total confusion, silence for the rest of it. So I continued to make myself as useful as possible to the organization, being a chauffeur, keeping on my janitorial activities. And it was about a month later that I had the courage to speak up at a public meeting or at a staff meeting. And I said, well, you know, I've got limited resources to keep me and my car going. And I don't mind spending any or all of it as long as it's on SNCC business. But lately, I felt people were taking advantage of the situation by getting me to drive them to pick up a six-pack of beer or to get their hair done. And I said, I didn't think that was right. So after Foreman said, well, we're going to put you on SNCC payroll, $10 a week with a little bit more for gas. A lot of times it didn't come for it. So that was one of the proudest moments of my young life, you know, because now I was officially part of SNCC, which was at the vanguard of this movement that was transforming America and indeed the world.
Thank you, Tamio. So the question we're trying to respond to is how did you fit into the movement, connect with SNCC, et cetera?
I should back up a bit. When I was working with HEP, that was part of the Northern Student Movement. I thought that was pretty safe. And HEP went to Washington for the Washington March. And while I was there, I came across this group of about 7 people, young people. They were all in coveralls with straw hats on. And I heard myself sing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And it really resonated to see them. These are like people I saw who had given their lives, you know, risked their lives and were continuing to do so, and had a lot of weight there in Washington as far as I was concerned. And I thought it'd be nice to be a part of that group. But I just thought it'd be nice. I had no idea at that time that things would happen. So I flew down there when I was accepted by COFO in the middle of the time when Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner had disappeared one night. People didn't know what had happened to them. It was very tense. And I found myself very tense on the plane. I was talking to a couple of Southerners, and I found myself being very careful about what I was talking about and so on. Anyway, I got down to Mississippi, went through the orientation course, did the photography that I talked about before. Somehow, in the course of going back and forth from the field to the Atlanta office and working, at one point, I was invited to, SNCC had retreats from time to time. They were like meetings. I was invited to one of those, and I went. I don't even know if I said anything or not. It was quite an event to see people. The Democratic Party process was amazing there because everybody got a chance to say their piece. and everybody else got a chance to say their piece. And there was a lot of self-expression, but there was not a lot of decision-making coming out of that.
All those interminable meetings, yeah.
Right, and the meetings would go on and on, so everybody had a chance to say what they wanted to say. It was really incredible example of democracy at work in the beginning stage. And somehow, in the course of that, I was invited to work regularly at the Atlanta office. And like Tamio, I found myself on salary making $9.64 a week, and found myself being a part of SNCC. Let me qualify what I just said about democracy in action, because shortly after that, well, during all this time, Vietnam was an issue. It was the international issue, as SNCC was the national issue. And at one of the retreats, somebody said, hey, how can we be talking about, civil rights and the rights of oppressed black people and the rights of oppressed other people, and there's a war going on in Vietnam, and we're not taking any kind of position about it? And before you knew it, there was another time when people would get up and give their opinion, sit down, somebody else would get up and give their opinion. That went on, and finally someone said, okay, now what are we going to do? What is SNCC's position on the Vietnam War? And somebody got up on the blackboard, and everybody got up and put their position down. And then it was summarized, and by the end of the day, a decision had been made. There was a policy that SNCC had put together about its position on the Vietnam War. And I found myself working in the SNCC office with the writers and the printers, putting together Student Voice, a newsletter about SNCC's viewpoint on the Vietnam War. And I found myself doing this. It was kind of a schizophrenic thing. I do this, then I go to Mississippi, or I go to Alabama, because by this time Selma had happened. And when I went to Selma, I went as a SNCC photographer directly for SNCC. And at the end of Selma and the Selma March, I found myself working in Lowndes County, Alabama, because the emphasis had moved from Mississippi, the Summer Project, to the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was something that inspired a group in California who saw the Black Panthers as a symbol. It was the Lowndes County Freedom Organization symbol. And SNCC's viewpoint on the Black Panther was, it doesn't attack, but if you back it up in the corner, it'll come out fighting like hell. And that symbol got picked up by a group out in Oakland, which became the Black Panther Party. So during that time, the Black Panthers became an armed group. And just as people in SNCC, some people had viewpoints about the Vietnam War, the whole issue of nonviolence came back up. And there was never a resolution within SNCC about violence or nonviolence. There were always nonviolent people, but there were a lot of people who said, if we need to pick up a gun, we'll do that. And that's what happened within the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. There was one night when the whites came and threatened to shoot up the Freedom House. And there's a photograph in this exhibit that shows two people sitting by a window. I think that's from Mississippi, but that really is what it looked like in Alabama that night. People with guns were all over Lowndes County. All night there to protect any of the candidates that were running in this freedom election. That's where they saw the threat being. And the next day, those candidates, nobody had been attacked, and the election was held. So my experience was basically to go to demonstrations, photograph them, but be a part of them as necessary, such that I ended up in Montgomery, where the SNCC were aiding the college students. What's the name of the college there in Alabama? The black college in Alabama. Tuskegee.
Tuskegee, yeah.
Tuskegee students decided that they were going to sit in at the church, at Martin Luther King's church. So SNCC came in and helped them do that. I basically found myself doing a lot of different things. And at the end of that summer, at the end of the Lowndes County movement, the Selma movement, there's an organization that started up called the Child Development Group of Mississippi. It was the first Head Start Center in the country. And what CDGM, Child Development Group of Mississippi, did was a set of Head Start centers all over the state of Mississippi. And these centers were built upon the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party political base in each of those areas.
Freedom schools.
And so my job was to go around and photograph these centers because CDGM also had a newsletter. And that was the last photographic experience that I had in Mississippi.
Thank you, Bob.
I had a somewhat different role in the South. As I said, I was older, and Les mentioned that I wore 3 hats, so let me start with the hats. I had begun my career as a photojournalist, which I wanted to do more than anything else. Before I came south, I had had an 8-page story in Look, which got the largest reader response of any story in Look's history, and about a brain-damaged kid, and a picture in Life. But more importantly, I knew all the editors in New York because I had been seeing them month after month, pitching story ideas to them, most of which they rejected. But in the process, I began to learn my business. So I came south thinking that I could produce these great story ideas from Mississippi, and they would immediately shower me with assignments. What I discovered was they didn't like my deeply thought out stories, or at least they didn't respond to them. But when something happened, the phone rang. So I had a family to support, and my way of doing that was as a working photojournalist. And I worked through that period regularly for Life, Look, Saturday Evening Post, Time, Newsweek, and other people. But I was also, I had come south particularly because of my commitment to nonviolence and to working with the movement. So my other hat was the field straw hat of a SNCC worker. I was not a member of SNCC as such, but I acted more as a consultant. I helped set up the darkroom in Atlanta. I gave various people photographic advice, and some of them later years said that I was their teacher. Surprised me. And when there was something to photograph, I photographed it. And then I'll get to the third hat in a minute. So in the fall of '63, I'm told there were about 35 civil rights workers in Mississippi, 35 people. It was, for us, like being on the front lines. It was the only time, if you think about soldiers on the front lines, a lot of things disappear. Class disappears, race disappears. All you know is you've got to, protect your buddy and stay alive. And that was sort of the way it was for us. It was the only time in my life when I lived in a truly beloved community where skin color made no difference. We were all together in this. And I can never think about it without a lot of emotion because it was such a empowering time for me. So in the fall of '63, I was shooting a lot for the movement, and occasionally when I got an assignment from other people. And that fall, the SNCC, or COFO, set up a mock election. The people in the South said, you know, our niggers just aren't interested in voting. So COFO decided we'll hold a mock election and get a little reality into this. In 3 months, they organized over 80,000 Mississippi people, and they voted in a mock election which elected a black governor and a white lieutenant governor, Ed King, who was one of our introduction to the South. That election also was the kernel for the idea of creating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which then went to Atlantic City the following spring. So as time wound on, in the winter of '64, Bob Moses and other leaders began thinking about what's the summer going to be like, and the idea was conceived to import 1,000 northern college students, volunteers, into the state to try to make, I say, break the back of segregation in one summer. That isn't really true, but to make some real progress. It was understood that in some ways these kids were hostages. They were, a lot of them, Ivy League students from prominent families, some from government families, and with parents who would be very concerned about what happened to them in the South. And I began thinking, what can I do? How can I get involved in this? I had in previous years tried to form a documentary photography group to carry on the work of the famous Farm Security Administration photographers of the 30s. And a bunch of us met in New York and worked on this for a while, but the idea fell apart or didn't get done. One of the early influences on my life was Dorothea Lange, who was well known for that work, and who had convinced me that photography could be not just a neat profession or a way of earning a living, but could be a way of life. And in my case, a vehicle for expressing my social convictions. So I decided to try again and start a documentary photography project. I went to New York and tried desperately to raise money for this, but I'm a terrible fundraiser and I failed utterly. And finally, one afternoon, I ended up in the office of Howard Chapman, who was the director of Black Star, and I poured out my woes to Howard. And he said, well, how much money do you need? And I figured in the times and the way SNCC was working on almost no funds, we could do it with 10 grand. So I said, $10,000. And Howard got on the phone and raised that in 20 minutes. So I came back and I had money. I had convinced Danny Lyon that he should come back south and work with us. Danny had thought civil rights was over as an interesting thing to photograph. And I convinced a farm worker photographer from Fresno, George Ballas, who had been south, to come back. And I got a couple of other people. And then later in the summer, this young, fresh-faced couple from New York showed up. And I knew that they didn't have the dossiers of the dirty likes of us. And so I sent them to a white community to document life in that community. So we ranged through the South for the summer, and I thought this would be a pilot for a longer project, university-sponsored, that might go on for 3 or 4 years. But Again, we could never get the money together. In the fall of '64, after the failure of the the MFDP in Atlantic City, there was a general reevaluation among civil rights folks about where do we go from here. The strategy up until that time had been, we'll get the word out to the liberal groups in the North who are our supporters, and they will get the government kicking and screaming into the act to support civil rights in the South. After Atlantic City, it was clear that liberal Democratic politicians in the South or in the North had other agendas, and that we could not depend on that strategy. And there was a general feeling we got to do it alone. There was also a feeling among the black civil rights workers that in some ways their movement had been taken over by all these white volunteers. A lot of the SNCC offices were now run by Yaleys, not because they had taken over, but because they had office skills. And so there was a feeling we've got to take the movement back and make it ours again. And there was a parting of the ways. Not everyone white left the movement, but it was not like Black Power says you gotta go. It was like we cried on each other's shoulders and embraced and went our separate ways, some of us anyway. For me, I had 2 kids, excuse me, who were ready to enter school, and there was no way in hell I was going to put them in Mississippi schools. New Orleans was at least, in theory, an integrated school system. We moved to New Orleans. I set up a darkroom. I intended to carry on the Southern Documentary Project there. People from the movement filtered through our house. They slept on the floors. They worked in the darkroom. Maria did a lot of work there. Bobby came through, and it became kind of a way station. When we left Mississippi in the fall, Janine and I, looking back on it, tried to figure out what's the most radical thing we could do to carry on personally. And we decided on the basis of what had happened in the Freedom Schools, this miraculous coming together of Northern volunteers and young black kids, that we should try to educate children. That the most long-term thing we could do was to find a way to give young black children a better start than their segregated schools would give them. So in the evolution of this, my wife Janine became one of the 3 founders of the first Head Start programs in the country, the flagship of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. We got $1 million and set up schools, as Bobby said, all over Mississippi and gave money to small community groups in these towns. And they had never had money before, and we said, here's some money, set up your own school. This was so threatening to the Mississippi power structure that Senator John Stennis, who was then chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, told Johnson, if you don't get rid of CDGM, I'm going to cut off funding for Vietnam. And so Johnson sent somebody down to kill the program. Politically, he could not kill the program by shutting it down. First, they sent a bunch of government auditors to find malfeasance. They found none. So they said, we got to move it in the middle of the summer to this black college in the far corner of the state, which we knew was the death of the project. And the people working on CDGM said, we're not going to do it. They said, okay, we're cutting your funding. The people in CDGM said, we'll work without money. We'll work as volunteers. they sent a lawyer down to bring the message to us, and we had a meeting that went on until 3 in the morning. And this guy was a real hard ass. He didn't move at all. And finally, it was people had to work the next day, and so we regretfully shook his hand and said, "Well, we're sorry. We got to get some sleep. I'm sorry we couldn't come to an agreement." And at that point, he said, "You win. You win." The political cost to Johnson of having shut down a program that was then carried on by unpaid volunteers was so great that we prevailed. And I think I should stop.
Thank you, Matt.
In April or May,
Excuse me. Bob, why don't you just go? Just take a cool. Yeah. One of us is taking a bathroom break. Bob is, and he'll be back. And, so don't hold it against him as it was against Hillary Clinton.
Do your thing, Bob.
I won't take it long.
Thank you.
okay?
Yeah.
In April, May of 1964, I was up in the air whether I was going to go to Mississippi or not. Julie Prettyman had suggested that I go hear Sandy Lee, who was the project director for Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He was up in New York recruiting people to go south. I went to the meeting, and after Sandy spoke, he came up to me and asked if I were going to Mississippi. And I said I did not think so, but I was just here. And so Sandy, I think he was in the city about 2 weeks recruiting, and we hung out a lot, we spoke, and I decided to go. And when I decided to go, I went down to Washington to speak to Julian Bond and Marion Barry, and to kind of tell them what I was about, and this is what I'd like to do. Sandy and I had discussed, he wanted me to document his program in Hattiesburg. And so as I decided to go, I went to the training program in Oxford, Mississippi, Oxford, Ohio, the training session for SNCC. And there were 2 sessions. And I was in the second session. There I met Tamio Wakayama, and we had made a deal that I would take my film and send it to SNCC's darkroom in Atlanta, and SNCC could use any of my photographs during the summer. At the end of the summer, when I left, I would receive my negatives back, which I did, and I'm so thankful, Mr. Wakayama. So basically, that's how I ended up in Mississippi.
Good.
I didn't have a VW.
Just as well.
I had a 1957 Packard. I bought it secondhand for $300. And it saved my life and the life of an older woman and her daughter from Bolivar County when we were coming home from Tennessee and stopped in Memphis for gas, because it did use gas. And we're coming down Interstate 51 on our way to Batesville, and we're followed in about, I think it was a 57 Chevy, by 2 young men with a shotgun in the middle of them, white men. And they tried to get on the tail of the car, and so, well, let me tell you about the Packard. it went up to 135 miles an hour, and there was not a shake or shimmy. I'm not exaggerating either.
Whoa.
Well, this little six-cylinder that they had couldn't keep up with it. But I kind of felt like, well, what would happen if my car blew a rod or something? And here comes, there I see a semi. I'm cresting the hill, and there's a semi. And I'm thinking, yeah, at least a witness. You know, if something happens to us, there'll be a witness. So I get up, go alongside the semi, pull in front of him, and slow down, freaking him out, I'm sure. And so then he tries to kind of slow down, and I stay slow down. Then he speeds up, and I speed up, and we kind of have this little tandem action going on. And the Chevy is sort of like trying to pull alongside, but, you know, there's going to be a witness here. So the Chevy finally dropped back, and I hit it and made it down to Batesville. Probably, I don't even know how many miles it was at that point, because we were not stopping on that highway. And we came down the front of the interstate exit, and I cut the lights and then just got underneath the interstate. And the truck and the Chevy roared over us. And the point of this story is not how great this Packard was. The point of this story is those two women were like my spiritual support. They didn't scream, they didn't panic. You know, they didn't, because they knew I had to stay focused on, you know, what we were doing. But it was like we were, all three of us, saving us, in addition to the Packard saving us, of course. And then on our way back, for me to drop them off in Bolivar County, they'd kind of like just, we all of it, at this point, it was like, well, that's kind of one of those normal things that happens, you know, it's open season on civil rights workers, so you just kind of forget it. But I think that women were the anchor. And there was a lot of kind of talk about how chauvinist SNCC men were. And there were some chauvinist men, of course there are, still are.
No.
But, yeah, we'll not go there right now. And like, it's like Bobby's response to my question, you know, with my saying, well, you know, can't you help me get some pictures for this film strip I'm doing on the Batesville Okra Co-op? And he finally just threw up his hands and said, why don't you just do it? And I said, I don't know how to, I was terrified by using a camera. And he said, well, go down and see Matt, and he's promised that any SNCC person that wants to learn the camera. And he did it in such a way that it's like he had more faith in me than I had in myself. And I found that generally true. I pretty much evolved as a person who was able, especially with photography, take the reins in my own hands about what I needed to do without being dependent and without being under any man's thumb. And woe to any man that tried to put me under his thumb at a certain point. You got that way. And I wanted to kind of end this section with a story about a film strip I did. As I said earlier, our work in SNCC was to kind of serve the needs of the community, and there were people up in the Delta that wanted to do a union of farm workers, and they came and asked me, would I be willing to make a film strip of how Cesar Chavez organized his union. And so I had raised money for the project to do film strips and books, and so I got a hold of, we had some SNCC folks, people don't know this, but SNCC supported two of Cesar's organizers for about 2 or 3 years. We sent surplus Valiants. We were known as the Valiant people because somebody donated a fleet of Valiant cars to us. We sent CB radios. So there's this kind of interaction going on between us and the farm workers. So I went over there and I made the film. I got shot the film. Yeah, shot the film strip, and Father McKnight from Louisiana, who was a big, strong cooperative on cooperatives and how they would really be important in the black community to develop an economy that could be empowering. And so he had invited a lot of these sort of evicted farm workers who had, some have tried to do this union, and some just got evicted because they were doing voter registration. And he invited me to kind of show my Batesville Okra Co-op film strip, and I said, well, Father, can I also show the film strip on the United Farm Workers in California, Cesar Chavez's group? And he said, sure, bring whatever you want. So this was a 2 or 3 day meeting, so it was my turn to show that film strip on the farm workers. And we projected it up on the wall. And a film strip is like just a strip. So, like you explaining to me an iPhone, I have to explain to you the film strip. It's a strip of positive film that's been, and it's too complicated for me to tell you how we made it. We can make it for 10 cents a piece. So flickering up on the walls are these pictures of protesting in the grape fields. The white sheriff, taking brown field workers and organizers into paddy wagons, sometimes beating them up. And so I finished the film strip, and there was this just huge silence. And I'm like, oh. Well, I guess that was kind of a failure. And then I always get kind of choked up around this thing. This older man got up. He's like really tall, probably in his late 60s, and really stooped over, and he looked at me and he said, "You don't know what it's like not to be the only ones." And it was a huge opening of one's view of your own life and your own struggle, to know that other people are going through the same thing that you're going through. And that was the impact that we had with because there wasn't all marches, and it wasn't all events, and it wasn't all voter registration. It was a whole lot of other stuff.
Yep.
And these training materials that people asked me and Bob and others to make supported that work. It was a tremendous amount of rich work that went on. Thanks.
Can I say one thing briefly to that? You shouldn't think of us as photographers.
Okay.
Maria and other people, and George Ballas and so on, thought of themselves as organizers with cameras. The heart of the movement was not, as she said, the demonstrations. It was the organization work that went on little by little through communities. And that was the strength of the movement, and was the reason that the movement succeeded insofar as it did. And I just want to emphasize that dual role that we all felt.
Okay, we're going to go and show some photographs now. And so everybody has picked 3 or 4 photographs to talk about, and the photographers are going to talk a little bit about their approach to photography, the value of the shots they made, possibly the experience of making the images. So we'll start. I'm going to help this process. I've got the images on my laptop. So, okay, here we go. I was wondering if we could dim the lights a little.
Can you see? Can you see?
Oh, sorry. If I could turn
No.
Can you see? Because I can move.
No, I can look at the thing I'm looking. That's what I was asking.
Okay, here we go with Tamio.
Here we go.
So Tamio selected 4 images. I'm going to project the first one.
This is one of the first photographs I took. I wasn't a photographer when I arrived in the South. And when I joined up with SNCC, it was involved in an intense campaign to desegregate all the facilities in the downtown core. So the Atlanta jail was filled up with demonstrators, and we had Jim Foreman in there raising all kinds of hell. And he got word back to us that we needed more bodies and to keep up the pressure and to get a mass rally happening at nearby Morehouse, a black college in Atlanta. But unfortunately, most of the people in the office were in jail. So nobody was around to create a flyer announcing this mass rally. So I worked in the layout room of the Student Voice for helping out a little bit. So I went down and said I'll see what I could do. I'd never done anything like this before. And then I found this great headshot that Foreman had taken about a week earlier of these Klansmen that had invaded one of the the restaurants in order to prevent demonstrators from coming in. So he took this shot of this Klansman, this big fat Klansman, grimacing out from the window, with the peak cap and the whole regalia, like this. And so I took this and grabbed an 1114 sheet of paper, plunked it in the middle, went on the Verityper, and I said, "The face of Atlanta, come help us change it. Mass rally it," And everybody loved this poster. And then Danny came up and said, "Well, you obviously got some kind of eye, and so maybe you should try see what you can do with the camera." So he lent me his Nikon with that incredibly beautiful, sharp 105 lens. And on my spare time, I would walk out, in the neighborhood in which the office was at and take pictures. Now, this was one of the first pictures I had ever taken. And I walked out in the office, and there were these kids playing. And I said, "Hey, what y'all doing?" And they said, "Well, we was playing Superman." And I said, "Oh, I thought you was playing Super Snick, fighting the evil forces so that black people could be free." He said, yeah, we Super Snick, and click. Okay, roll.
We're doing it.
This was taken. My job. Unfortunately, I was seconded to Matt's project, and we'd set up a darkroom in the Atlanta office, and we took over the women's bathroom and turned it into a darkroom. And this was before the women's movement took real hold. Anyway, so this was my purgatory over the summer. I was assigned to man this, and I hated this room. I mean, Atlanta gets awfully hot. And this teeny little room, forget about air conditioning, it wasn't even ventilated. So Judy Richardson remembers that I'd come out of there after several all-nighters looking like a zombie, And so I processed film, sometimes 12, 16 at a time, in total blackness. So I'm rolling this film out, sweating, and I could hear the rats. And then I had open sandals at that time. So I'm rolling this film, and I feel this furry body, crawling over my. But I managed to hang on to the film, and. But I escaped purgatory, and there were several trips out into the field, and this was on one of the first ones. And I just left Bobby in Jackson, and I said, okay, well, I want to go check out the Mississippi Delta. So I drove north, and then I remember driving, I believe, just past Natchez, and then there was this stretch of highway. And the kudzu vine is this invasive plant that was brought over from Japan. Sorry about that, but this one section of it, the trees all along, and the kudzu had grown over, so it was driving through like a canopy of green. It was like Disneyland. It was magical, and I came through that, and then the Mississippi Delta opened up. And I thought, wow, this is an incredible land. And I felt an immediate affinity for it because it was like the land that I grew up with in southern Ontario. And there was this beautiful kind of integrity, organic integrity to the land where the man-made objects didn't seem so much as man-made, but like they oozed from the ground. And the black people, they were so visually consistent with the rich black soil of the Delta, which had been worked since the days of slavery. And so that image, I had to stop and take it, and that captures my feeling for the land. And my work is a homage to the land and its people. Incidentally, that picture, we had a exhibit of SNCC photography at the Smithsonian I don't know how many years ago, and they blew this picture up into an 8-foot mural, and that guided you into the exhibit. So immediately set the mood. And I've had people tell me, old Mississippi hands, that they begin to sweat when they see that picture because it evokes the Delta to them. And this woman was in Mount Bayou. Mount Bayou is this quite an incredible community in the Delta. It's a totally black community. And so I landed there, and there's this woman, totally nonplussed by this strange foreign teeny car, which disgorges this weird Asian kid with 3 cameras strapped around his body, and she looks at me and kind of smiles. And I look at her and kind of smile and click, and so the picture is. She reminds me of the Issei of my community, you know. Who had gone through so much in their lives and yet had maintained their sense of humor, their sense of humanity, and were not embittered by the process, but were fully alive.
Tell them what that Issei word means.
Yeah, it's the first generation they were the pioneers of our community who went through the Depression, the war, being locked up in the camps of having to restart, you know. And this woman went through Jim Crow, slavery, you know, the whole gamut of the black experience in America, and came out in this beautiful. And the other thing is, it's a homage to them, the local people of Mississippi, because it cannot be stressed enough that they were the actual heroes. I mean, we went in there and we could always pull out and return to our lives, but those people had to stay there and face the consequences of their actions, of protecting us, of feeding us, of housing us, and they could be killed, they could lose their jobs, they could lose their homes, and it was incredible courage on their part to go and register to vote and to take care of us. So again, my work is a homage to them. Okay, I thought we'd end on a bit of drama. This is the scariest picture I took in all the time I was in Mississippi, and this I took after the Freedom Summer program ended and everybody returned, or most people returned to their campuses in the north. And then I was free at last from this terrible dark room, and I could just wander around Mississippi photographing to my heart's content. And there was this voter registration drive that happened in this, somewhere in the Delta, I think somewhere around Macomb, Mount Bayou, somewhere in there anyway, at this mom and pop store. And then our volunteers would bring the local black people to register to vote. And there was these group of white Southerners to intimidate the people. I mean, they didn't do anything really violent, but they throw out like kind of snide remarks, you know, about one thing or another. So I went out and I took a picture, and the violence from that guy looking into the camera is palpable, if looks could kill. And I can't believe it, but this thing lay in my files for decades until one day, about 10 years ago, I got a call from Aisha, and she was the daughter of Gwen Robinson, Zohara Robinson, who was a very good friend of mine who I met when she was a Spelman. And she later joined the project and became the director of the Laurel Project. Anyway, Aisha was doing a film, and she asked me if I had any shots of her mother during that period. And I said, well, I'll go in my files, and then I'll look through, and I'll send you some contact sheets of, well, I think maybe relevant. And some sharp-eyed editor circled that image for it to be printed that they could look at. And I said, holy, how did I ever miss this? You know. Okay.
Thank you, Tamio. So, Bob, I'm going to pull up your images. I just wanted to remind you, Bob, you said some interesting things about Cortland Cox's impact on your style of photography.
Blank look.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about.
You think you, okay, yeah, all righty. Let me begin here, and here we go.
This is Reverend McCraney in Lee County with his wife. This was after Mississippi summer. This was when I, like Tamio, was driving around just documenting the area. And I somehow met him, and he let me photograph him and his wife and his house. And the thing that really impressed me was that burial policy up behind him, that was really that important to them. That was a key aspect of life for them to have the security in the beyond. I also met his daughter. I have a photograph that's not in the exhibit here, where she was breastfeeding her youngest and standing out on the road, which I liked very much too, but this was like really the impressive picture for me. This was life on the Delta. This picture is actually misnamed, misidentified. This is not Mississippi. This is Lowndes County, Alabama. And this is land. The man in the back owned the land, and these people were working for him. They were not subjugated to oppression and so forth. They were just helping this man get his cotton out. But what I liked about it was that it looked like the way things used to be. And I was able to catch them. Like I said, my family sent me to the Detroit Institute of Art. And this is one of the things I learned about composition was, perspective. And so I found myself, I took a number of shots of this, and I found myself some place there getting the very right photograph for me, getting the right angle, which was what a lot of my photography was about, getting the right angle and the right composition. This is just like the photograph of Reverend McCrary and his wife, showed just a small aspect of a larger body of photography that I did just around that subject. This was about the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union, and they had what they called Strike City, where a lot of the sharecroppers moved off the plantation and set up tents on Highway 61. But this was their headquarters. And people were organized to, it was about kind of like a minimum wage organization back at that time. And again, I just felt like I'd caught the right moment of showing the tension there visually with the strikers and what the strike was about. And there's the Black Panther. I took a lot of shots of this also as they were taking the sign out. And this was the one moment that I caught that I felt like really showed the land, the building that this came out of, which was the SNCC office in Lowndes County, as well as a couple of SNCC people bringing the sign out. I have another shot of a sign sitting on the side of a road, kind of on a hill. So you see the sign and you see the background there.
Bob, you said that Cortland Cox had mentioned at a meeting that something about that we no longer need to feel like victims.
Victims, yeah.
And we need to look at ourselves as people capable of making change for ourselves. And you said you began photographing from that kind of perspective. Do you want to maybe say something about that?
There was a point in time when I was in the Atlanta office in the dark room, and then I'd go to Mississippi and we'd all ride together in the car. And it happened a number of times. And one day, we had stopped for gas. Cortland got back in the car. He said, it's time for us to forget about victims. We don't need to focus on victims. We're not victims. We're really activists, and that's what we need to project. And I thought about that. And I had this photograph that was composed of a bunch of little kids sitting on the side of the road. They were grubby looking, poor looking. They had some kind of biscuit or something in their hands. They really looked like victims. And when I took it, it was before Cortland said that, I said, this will make the perfect fundraising photo. When he said that, I realized that I was looking in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. And so I began looking out for photographs that would show people more aggressive, more active, more assertive. It had quite an impact on me.
Good. We just lost it. We'll get it
If
back.
you look at the pictures in the first room of the gallery, the section on Black life, I think you'll see the focus we all had, which was on the dignity, the humanity, the beauty of the people we were working with. There are no downtrodden, oppressed, pitiable people in that room. And that was two things. The people we found were not that way, and also our focus as photographers was not that way. And I think that's one of the unique things of this exhibition.
Bob, did you want to add anything else, or are you done?
I'm pretty much done.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, here we go.
I want to say one other thing of Cortland Cox's that stuck in my mind. In the fall of '64, when we were reevaluating, Cortland said, up until now it's been about integration. From now on, the focus should be on Black liberation.
What you said.
This is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship of photographers to subjects. This was a woman I encountered in a Deacons for Defense march in Bogalusa, Louisiana in 1963. I'm sure that she lettered that sign on her kitchen table, and she believed in that sign. So I stopped to photograph her, and although we were in separate universes politically and emotionally, for that brief moment, we were partners. She wanted to be photographed, and I wanted to take her picture. This is a picture that won the World Press Photo Contest for 1965. It was a day in Jackson, Mississippi, when the jails were filled and they had opened the cattle stockyards at the fairgrounds, and they were incarcerating people in the blazing sun. Because COFO had run out of troops, they were now doing small guerrilla demonstrations rather than large masses of people. And they weren't announcing themselves in true nonviolent fashion beforehand. They were just appearing. The town was crowded with press. Somebody would have a police scanner. We'd get word of a demonstration. We'd all rush there. And by the time we got there, it was all over. People were loaded in the paddy wagon. Then everybody would sit down on the curb and wait for the next occurrence. I hate press packs. I hate to be in press packs. And there I was in a press pack, sitting on the curb with everybody else, and I said, I don't know where the next event is going to occur, except I know it ain't going to be here. So I got up and I started walking toward the center of town, and as I passed the governor's mansion, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this flurry of activity. I went up the sidewalk, and a stalwart civil rights leader from Macomb, Mississippi, Mrs. Eileen Quinn, was sitting on the side steps with her 4 children, and a sign which said, or protested the fact that there'd been a Mississippi election that no blacks had been able to take part in. Now, you have to understand the principle of the symbolism of the American flag to understand this photograph. The American flag, if you carried it in Mississippi in that time, said, we want the laws of the United States to be enforced in the apartheid South. Otherwise, you flew a Confederate flag in the back of your pickup truck. The American flag was a potent symbol. People were pulled from their cars and beaten on the highways of Mississippi because they had a little tiny flag, American flag decal on their license plate frame. So all the kids were carrying little American flags, and as they led 5-year-old Anthony Quinn away to jail, his mama said, Anthony, don't let that man take your flag. And Anthony held on. He told me many years later, in fact, last year, he said, you know, I wasn't so afraid of that policeman. I was afraid of my mama. Any rate, leave it on. Could you leave it on for a moment?
Go back, yeah.
The cop reacted, probably had never had any opposition from a small black child before, and he reacted, almost reflexively, trying to yank the flag out of Anthony's hand, and in the background, while the deities who sometimes smile on photographers gave me this sign, no more police brutality. So, and I was right up in the face of this with a 24-millimeter lens, and nobody saw me. And that was the way action occurred in these times. You could go right into the middle of the action, which was the only way to get the really strong picture. You had to put a wide-angle lens in and get as close as you could. And people were so involved in what was happening, they didn't even see you. The last 2 pictures are have to do with luck and effort. This is about 3 days into the Selma March, and I had been walking backwards, looking through my camera. I walked 50 miles backwards through the whole march. And I had realized that I needed to get the marchers outlined against the horizon, with no trees dripping with Spanish moss behind them, breaking up the graphic quality of the march. And so that day I started throwing myself into ditches and shooting up. And this was my 3rd or 4th ditch, I think. There are 2 frames. In one frame, every hand and every arm and every foot is out of place. And then in this miraculous frame, everything, is graphically lined up. And sometimes it's only luck that gives you a shot like that. But the fact is, you work hard to arrive at that lucky point. It doesn't happen, without effort. And I love the way the flags flow up into that spotter plane run by the U.S. Army looking for Klansmen hiding in the ditches.
I love this next one.
That's probably my iconic civil rights photograph. This is my favorite photograph, my new favorite. These are the sons of sharecroppers following a service at the St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church in Valley View, Mississippi. And I didn't have to throw myself in a ditch to do this. They were all hanging out behind the church after service, and I said, "Can I take your picture?" And they all lined up under the trees, and I photographed them. It's kind of a sociological icon. Icon's too strong a word. It's a sociological document. If you look at it, in the front are the young men who are the best dressed. They're proud of their clothes. They want me to show their clothes in the best possible light. The two kids on the side are younger. They're a little more shabbily gotten together, and they clearly wonder whether they should be in the picture at all. But they're kind of in there. And then the older guys don't trust me at all, so they're all hanging out in the back. Church service in Mississippi was a time when black people could come together, address each other as Mrs. Jones and Mr. Smith rather than Robert and Roberta as their overseers would during the week. It was a time when they could respect each other and receive respect. It was the most important day of the week, I'm absolutely certain. And they dressed as best they could. I think everybody had a suit of clothes that hung somewhere in their house and was only worn on Sunday. The preacher told me that some of his parishioners walked the dusty roads to church barefoot, carrying their shoes so they would be spotless when they put them on for church. At any rate, I love this document. Great picture.
This photograph was taken in Oxford, Ohio, the training session for SNCC. It was either the first day that I arrived or the second day, I don't recall which, but earlier, Bob Moses was speaking to all of the volunteers, and I remember him speaking, and someone came up in the back of him and whispered something into Bob's ear. Bob left the microphone talking to all of us who were seated in the audience, and there were 4 or 5 people on the stage. They looked agitated. They were talking about something, and we knew that it was important. And Bob came back eventually to the microphone, and he informed us that three of the people who had left a few days before in the first group were missing in Mississippi. And the probability was that they were probably dead. So there was a silence, or for quite a while, I don't know how long, and then someone started singing. And then the side doors of the building, someone pushed open, and people just started filing out. There were hundreds of people, I think, in the audience. They started holding hands, and I had a bag full of cameras and lenses, and I got outside, and there's about a 5-foot stone fence, and I couldn't get up on the wall because I wanted to get up top to get the people coming out of the building, and so I just had a camera in my hand. I don't remember what the focal length of the lens was, but when I got up there, I was cursing myself because it was what I didn't want, but I had to document these folks coming out of that building. That's it.
That's my Volkswagen.
This is a photograph of Sandy Lee. He was a project director of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Again, this was I had arrived in Hattiesburg late afternoon, and this was my first morning in Hattiesburg. When I was picked up at my home to be brought to the office by Doug Smith, the 17-year-old assistant director of the project. Doug told me that the car that I had come down to Mississippi in, had been shot into, and another volunteer's car had been shot into. And so that was my first photographs in Mississippi are the cars that were shot into. Sandy, after I finished photographing the cars, Sandy says, "Come on with me." And so I followed him, and he introduced me to various people along Mobile Street, the proprietors of stores, and we went into a beauty shop. And Sandy, he introduced me to people in the beauty shop, and I was talking with them, and I noticed he kind of disappeared. And I looked around, and he was seated in this chair. And then I kind of knew why he took me around. He had a look. He had known, of course, he had known about the cars being shot into. And this was the beginning of our summer. And the responsibility that he had as a director. And I tried my best to capture that. And he was kind of relieved just to be away from the office and saying, "My God, this is the beginning of the summer," and enough. Rabbi Arthur Lelyvelt. There are a number of people who would come down throughout the summer who didn't have the time to spend. They would come down partially on their vacations and whatever to see what help they could be in Mississippi. The rabbi came down, I think, to help register people to vote. I was told at some point that the Cleveland Plain dealer wanted some photographs of the rabbi, and so I met with the rabbi and asked him what time and whatever. And we had a long conversation. We talked for a number of hours that evening. And so at one point he said, he called me photographer. Photographer, do you think what good does it do for the people who just come down to Mississippi for a short period of time? And so I said whatever I said, and at one point I said to him, jokingly, because we had that kind of rapport, I said, "Now, if you really want to do something worthwhile, you go down tomorrow, you go down and get your butt kicked. I will come and photo." This is joking. "And go down and get your butt kicked. I will come down there and photograph it, and we get some great PR going." Joking in a horror, And we laughed. The next morning, I was supposed to meet him at a specific time. I'm always on time. I was there 15 minutes earlier. But the rabbi had gone out earlier. I never found out why, but he went out doing voter registration earlier. And so I found somebody who took me to the area that the people might be. When I got out of the car, I saw a commotion up on a little knoll, and I knew something had happened. And I saw in the distance the rabbi and two of the volunteers, and I knew they were hurt. And so the rabbi was the most seriously injured. And so he was in shock. So we sat him down, and I knew I had to take a picture of this man. But what do I take a picture of him, or do I try to stop the bleeding, in an instant? And so the rabbi is in shock, and he looks up at me, and he says, "Take the picture, photographer." That's it.
Thank you, Herbert.
This was photographed on the March Against Fear, which is also called the Meredith March. And at this point, I was pretty march weary. I was only there because the Atlanta office called and said, would I cover it, because the state police had withdrawn protection. And the Deacons for Defense, by the way, and Martin King did not say no, were protecting this march because it was really dangerous. This is when James Meredith got shot when he came down. Okay, so I'm kind of like zoning out and took this picture. It was one of those ones that you don't even, it comes from someplace else, and then I find it on my negative. So I generally do sometimes these labels that are sort of like poetry. So this is called We Marched. We marched through the valleys of dread, reflections on 2 centuries of tears, not knowing where we would sleep or if morning would come, not knowing would it do any good. This is 66, so we're, okay, next one.
Excuse me, is it in the direction you want it to be? Yes. Their feet are at the top.
That's a good, people always hang this upside down. That's a good question, but this is correct. It's a reflection. So as I said before, it wasn't all marches. It was also this hard organizing work of going house to house and trying to see what people would do or wanted to be done. And this is what you faced in Mississippi Winter, which is the name of this, Mississippi Winter 1965. It was the winter of evictions, of striking field workers, of old people freezing to death under damp flour sack sheets, of the Klan still celebrating the murders of the 3, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. We came back from Atlantic City crowned in our powerlessness to start all over again on lonely plantation roads.
Wow. Right on.
This picture, speaks to me of pictures that I didn't take. I was not comfortable with just pointing my camera and picking it up. I was in the kitchen with Miss Hamer. This is Pap Hamer, her husband. And Miss Hamer, I came up to talk to her about a project we were doing together, and I knocked on the door, and she opened the door. She said, "Are you pregnant?" I said, "No, I don't think so." She said, "If you're pregnant, you cannot come in here because we're cutting the pig up, and we can't have any pregnant women near the pig." And who knows about folk medicine and what it really knows? It's hormones, So we're in there, and I'm helping her cut up while we're talking about this project we're working on together. And the conversation sort of drifts to food, of course, and I'm talking about how pinto beans in many ways are like black-eyed peas. There's sort of a correlation of Mexican food and, black Southern food, and it probably wasn't only black Southern food. And the similarities between quelites and collards, and of tortillas and cornbread, and then we used chili caribe, and Miss Hamer put red chili flakes on everything. That wasn't oatmeal or something. So she said, well, you know, Papa's out there and he's making crackling. I said, what's crackling? She said, oh, it's fried pork skin. I said, oh my God, my father loves chicharrones. So I went out and I said to him, can I take your picture because I want to show my dad this? And he let me do it. But it was a rare photograph that I would take of just front on to somebody's face. So there was a lot of cultural exchanges that went on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is, I put as a kind of a segue. I want to say a little comment about the Black Panther thing. The Black Panthers in Oakland did not just take that image. They respectfully called Mr. Hewlett, who said, may we use this image for the Black Panther Party? And he said yes. And it was from Mr. Hewlett that I heard the story of why they chose the panther, in terms of how I think Bob or Tamio had recounted. So let's go to the next one. So it wasn't all voter registration and marches. It also was when people said they wanted to do things to create some income for themselves or small businesses or whatever. This is up in West Point, and there's a lot of wood as a resource up there in this northeastern part of Mississippi. And there were several young men that wanted to do wood carving and make wood furniture. And so this is my shot of that effort, and there were quilters there that also wanted to do quilting co-op. And this is part of SNCC photography stands on the shoulders of Afro-American photographers back in the 19th century who were trying to deconstruct the racist stereotypes and horrible, ugly images that were projected in American media at the time. And they did it through portraiture at first, and later just moved on to do these pictures of proud people, proud, beautiful people. Now understand, when we're shooting here, you know, this whole Black is Beautiful thing came up because we've got Africa, countries in Africa that are becoming independent on their own. And we're meeting African leaders that come in one case, came to Atlanta to talk to some of us about their liberation movements, and we were talking about this one. And so our shooting was about saying to America, this is a beautiful, competent people, and you have to be done with your juvenile and racist dependence on you thinking you're superior.